Hi, guys. I wanted to tell you about today's topic, which is, should I hire a divorce lawyer? And I think in the past that was kind of a no-brainer. If you had the money, you hire a lawyer. A divorce is the dissolving of one of the most complex contracts we will ever enter into, the marital contract. And so we want to be as informed as possible, and we want to negotiate and make decisions that are in our best interest and the best interest of our kids. That being said, we're balancing a lot of things, right? We don't necessarily want to lawyer up in the traditional sense if we think that it's going to spark a war or it's going to lead to distrust, and then maybe our spouse will do something that's irrational or against our interests. So while we want to be informed and we want to know our legal rights, we also want to balance keeping our kids' health and safety in check and keeping, to the extent possible, the peace between our spouse. Because one thing we do know is not only is litigation expensive, but it doesn't always yield the best results, and it certainly doesn't yield the most practical result. So as an example, let's say you're fighting for 50-50. Your spouse will not give you 50% custody of your child, and that's super important to you, and you litigate the issue, and you end up with 50-50 custody, but you end up on a schedule because the court doesn't know you and hasn't spent a lot of time understanding what your situation is. You end up with a schedule that doesn't work for you and the kids at all. So in that case, right, we could have potentially either mediated the dispute or worked with a co-parenting counselor or a special master, somebody who's very, very skilled at resolving child custody disputes, but also is a therapist usually, or somebody who's very, very invested in the health and well-being of your children. And we can't do that if we're litigating. And so let me talk to you today about when it's a good time to hire a divorce lawyer and what that kind of means. Because if you are in the throes of divorce or thinking about divorce and this is all new to you, it's not rocket science, but it's definitely not easy either. And even the most experienced lawyers, I've been practicing law for 15 years. I'm a certified family law specialist in California. Divorce law is my jam. And yet, even I am still learning. And what makes things especially complicated is the differences in law between county to county, city sometimes to city, state to state, and so on. All right, so I don't want to overwhelm you. Let me get to the substance of today's talk. So first of all, there are three things I want you to think about when you're deciding whether to hire a divorce lawyer. The first is what your emotional well-being is like. So you can be the smartest person in the world, the most capable person in the world, have a really good sense of what your rights are and what your financial situation looks like. But if you're still processing your divorce in a really meaningful way, in a way that doesn't necessarily give you a lot of space to handle negotiating your divorce, then that's important to note. Can you handle negotiating? Can you handle making these really complicated, real decisions in real time when you have so much going on, not just the divorce stuff, but possibly your work or looking for a job, your kids, your own well-being, maybe your parents. I mean, we have a lot on our plates these days. And so I want you to look at your emotional well-being. I also want you to look at the complexity of your estate. And by estate, I'm using that very liberally. I'm talking about the property and debts that you have. I want you to think about, what do my spouse, what do I have? Do we have retirement plans? Do we have perhaps vested or unvested interests in stock, like restricted stock units? Do we have credit card debt? Do we have student loans? Is my or my spouse's income difficult to understand? Maybe they're a small business owner. Maybe they have rental income and it's difficult to determine what are actual expenses and what are, I wouldn't say fabricated, but maybe put on tax returns like depreciation or something like that, that isn't necessarily a real deduction for purposes of, setting support or determining someone's income, but you are allowed to deduct it for purposes of taxes. So I want you to think about the complexity of your state. I want you to think about your emotional well-being. I also want you to think of that of your spouses. Are they in a situation where they can negotiate the divorce? What might be best to yield the most positive results for both of you? Because divorce does not need to be a zero-sum game. There are ways that both of you can come out feeling empowered and better. And if you do, well, hey, especially if you have to co-parent, that's like absolutely ideal. The third thing that I want you to think about is your spouse. So nobody knows your spouse better than you. You know what their triggers are, you know what their emotional issues are, you know if they have mental health problems. Now, just because they have a mental health issue doesn't mean you can't have a relatively smooth divorce. Many of us have mental health issues, but I'm talking about narcissism or something that like really, really could affect the way your divorce goes. I want to know whether or not you think you and your spouse can develop some ground rules about keeping your divorce out of court, perhaps maybe even a budget. Here's what we're willing to spend. A way to think about, well, what if we do run into issues that we can't resolve? How are we going to resolve them? Who are we going to bring in to help us? But if you're not able to establish some ground rules, I want you to think about how likely is it that my spouse and I are going to be able to somehow, some way come to an agreement outside of court. And knowing your spouse, if you think you trust that they are in integrity, or you trust maybe not that they're in integrity, but they feel like they have too much to lose and there's no way they're going to go to court. But I want you to trust your gut on this one. Obviously, it's not perfect, but what is it? Do you think they're going to be somewhat reasonable? Or is this going to be a really messy, awful ordeal? And if you do think it's going to be a really messy, awful ordeal, then I want you to think about lawyering up. I want you to think about getting a divorce lawyer, maybe not even to represent you in the full sense where you put down a retainer and you start moving the case forward. Maybe not that yet, but I want you to think about getting a divorce lawyer who can at least advise you on your rights, who can review the paperwork that you prepare, and that can set you up so that you are, if things do get messy, which in your case they might likely do, that you have a lawyer who is ready to jump in and represent you to the best of their ability. That's super important. The other time I want you to think about hiring a divorce lawyer is if your estate is not only super complex, either the stuff that you own or your spouse owns or that both of you own, but you also don't have access to the financial stuff that you need. It's either in your spouse's possession, or they're stonewalling you, or they have a really aggressive attorney. You're not able to get access to the things that you need so that you can make a decision on what your position is going to be. Divorce is a super, as I said earlier, a super complex contract that you are navigating out of. And if you don't know the terms of that contract, how can you possibly make decisions that benefit you? So you might need a lawyer to help you get access to the documents. Now, let me tell you that at Hello Divorce, most of our clients do not have this issue at all, because the law in most states is that you have to be transparent and you have to provide your spouse with this information. Then you can take this information and process it on your own, or with a legal coach, which is a lawyer that you hire in increments, usually, as opposed to paying a retainer and having them be the face of your case, or with a certified divorce financial analyst who can help you process all the financial information that you get and decide what makes the most sense for you, not just financially, but also just from a practical standpoint. Does it make sense to keep the house or keep the retirement, or a little bit of both, and so on and so forth? So we usually don't have that issue, but if you do, then you might need a lawyer to help you get the information that you need. And that's a really good sort of red flag. If your spouse is not sharing the information that you need, that's a real problem. The other time is if you have a really complex estate that you feel like you need a lawyer to help you work through. Sometimes we don't necessarily negotiate based on our values, but instead based on the law. We want a good sense of what the court would do if we were to litigate this issue. And in that case, it's an awesome idea to consult with a lawyer. At Hello Divorce and Levine Family Law Group, we offer legal coaching, which is that you can simply schedule 30 minutes or an hour or maybe a 5-hour block to work with a lawyer on a particular aspect of your case that you're having a little bit of trouble with, but not necessarily for the entire divorce. And in California and many other states, you don't even need to disclose to your spouse that you're working with a legal coach, which is awesome because, again, sometimes when you disclose that, it really causes great concern to your spouse and things start to escalate. I also recommend that you use a legal coach to review your final judgment, just to make sure all the T's are crossed, I's are dotted, and that everything that's in the divorce judgment says what you think it says, that it's very, very clear. And there aren't any disclaimers or warnings or waivers that you might be signing away even though you didn't know or it's not something that you talked about. So that is also. All right, so we talked about your spouse and their mental health. We talked about very, very complex estate. And I just want to circle back and talk about when you are feeling so overwhelmed and emotional that you feel like you need an advocate on your side. That's a really great time to hire a legal coach or a lawyer. And this is a subject of a whole nother talk. But when you get to that point, I want you to think really, really critically about how you go about hiring one. And while I don't have none of us really have the time right now to go into that, it's not the subject of today's talk, I'll just give you a few pointers. One is, if you can get a referral from a friend who had a divorce that went similarly to how you would like to see yours go, hey, that's fantastic. I'd like you to check out the way lawyers blog, whether or not they're out there sharing resources and information with their communities, and whether or not that resonates with you. Also take a look at their webpage and their About Me section. Does their bio resonate with you? You want to think about whether or not they spend more time negotiating or litigating, what their strategy is when they take your case, whether or not they use technology, secure technology, to not only help bring down the cost, but also help streamline your experience. There's so many different things, and a lot of it is just using your common sense, but I want to bring that to your attention. So I hope today's information was helpful, and I will be back soon. Stay safe, take care of yourself and your family, and I look forward to talking to you soon.